Just before we start the podcast, here's a message from our sponsor, F1 Delta Time. F1 Delta Time is the officially licensed Formula One game running on the Ethereum blockchain from Animoca Brands. They've just started to drop their 2020 season NFTs. In the game, you need to buy a car, and then you can buy various components that you fit to the car, also drivers and various tires. Obviously, you need to put together the right combination for each individual track that you're going to race, and the winners of the leaderboard get various types of crypto, including the in-game cryptocurrency called Rev. Check it out now at f1deltatime.com. Hello and welcome to Blockchain Gaming World episode 85. We're cranking through them now for our end of year specials. And joining me to talk about what happened in 2020 is Robby Young from Animoca Brands. How's it going, Robby?
It's going very well, thank you.
Good. And I know from just been looking at the numbers that you've had a great year. So you're not just being polite.
Yeah, no, I think it's been a really good year for us. I mean, I think honestly, it's been great for everybody who's in blockchain games and the wider NFT space outside of games as well. It's been really, I mean, this has been the year of NFTs, although I guess you and I inhabit a little bit of an echo chamber because we're up to our necks in it. But if you think back to where we were just in 2019, I mean, this year is like night and day because we've seen so many projects that have been in discussion or early, pre-sale phase start to really have users playing actual games and games having been launched. And then you've got some games that have now been out for a couple of years that are still continuing to go from strength to strength. I'm thinking of the original CryptoKitties to things like Splinterlands and Axie Infinity and stuff that was, the only games that were launched last year. Still continue to flourish this year, and then you've got a whole host of new products as well. So we can't complain. It's been fabulous.
Cool. So I was kind of thinking because there's so many things we could talk about with Animoca Brands because literally you have your fingers in so many pies. Obviously, the Sandbox has had a really great year, and you're also one of the lead investors in Axie Infinity, which actually was one of my previous podcasts. So we won't talk about those ones in particular. But I kind of thought F1 Delta Time, which is I guess your kind of signature blockchain game, would be one to go for. And I was just kind of looking, making sure I had all the data to hand, looking at all the sales you've been doing, and that's quite quite a considerable list. Before we kind of get into the detail of particularly how NFTs have worked for F1 Delta Time this year, do you want to give us like a little of a kind of potted view of what F1 Delta Time is?
Sure. So F1 Delta Time is the officially licensed Formula One game for blockchain. And so we have had those rights now for a couple of years. And because it's a blockchain collectible based game, it's allowed us to follow, many other blockchain style games in launching content pre-sales and building a community in advance of the sort of entire game experience being available. So as you know, we started developing and selling content last year in 2019 in the summer. And then we slowly, built more content and then eventually started launching some features like time trials and some racing, gameplay earlier this year. And now the full game experience is actually launching shortly. I believe you might get a nice Christmas present for that. So we've been able to launch it in stages, and we've been very fortunate that I think the player base, the audience, has really embraced the idea of a Formula One game, both from a gameplay standpoint because they like racing games, but also from the standpoint of being interested in actually owning the content in the game and owning this exclusive licensed merchandise, I think is another way to look at it. And so they've been very supportive in a number of different types of content sales that we've done. And I think what it's served to do really is to broaden the appeal of what a Formula One game could be. I like to try to explain it to people who aren't as familiar with the game industry that, there are sort of games and then there are meta games, and a Formula One racing game traditionally has had a a simulation aspect to it often. So that would be what we'd all think of as the game. And then you'd have the sort of football manager style metagame where you could trade drivers and kit out cars, and it's more of the management portion of the game. And that's, that's a typical metagame. But with the layer of blockchain on top, it gives us yet a third, type of gameplay or another metagame, which is here I own stuff, and now what does ownership actually mean? How do I play ownership, if you will? So we launched some features that include things like the ability to stake your cars, and that was done for two reasons. One, because staking is something that is obviously popular in the DeFi world and with people who are sort of crypto enthusiasts, and we knew that that was a way to appeal to that audience who's very comfortable with that terminology in crypto, that maybe they would find that interesting about our game NFT project. But also from a game, if you're coming at this not knowing anything about crypto, then as a game player who just wants to play a racing game, it gives you another option, because you can actually then say, look, I can't afford this car because maybe the car that I want to play in the game is too expensive but to own, but I can rent it. So when somebody who owns the car stakes it, another player gets to rent it and have the benefit of ownership for that time so they can race it. And that's something that we haven't seen before in racing games, just because we didn't have the technology to enable that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it covered a lot of stuff there. I guess during the podcast we'll start to unpick some of that. But I think it's very good positioning, as you kind of said. There's the gameplay, which I guess is kind of what everyone typically thinks about with a game. There's something you control, and it jumps up and down, or it shoots, or that's what we do. And then we have kind of we've seen, I guess, with mobile, we've seen this kind of idea of a meta game. So that's more about the kind of management style or leveling up in an RPG. And the really interesting thing about, I think, what blockchain brings, and certainly brings to F1 Delta Time, is it actually connects those together in a meaningful way, in the sense that the things you own, and as you get more of them, or they get better, that helps the gameplay, and also helps you kind of progressing through the metagame helps you unlock those sort of things, which is kind of has been in games before, but that's been very in some ways, it's like certainly in the free-to-play mobile side, it's kind of been there's been a barrier to those two things linking together, which has basically been the amount of time in there. I think blockchain allows us to unlock some of the value in there, and some people have a lot of time, and some people have a lot of money, and it allows us to unlock that in a more holistic way. And obviously, we're only really scratching the surface of things like renting. But I guess what's interesting, and we are seeing this in F1 Delta Time already. In blockchain, we often talk about community, and in blockchain games we talk about community, and what's been interesting, I guess, is because this value is not created by the developer as it would normally be, it's created by the community, whatever that means. We've started to see some quite significant movement in people kind of coming, I guess, from the esports kind of type of audience, or seeing F1 Delta Time as a esports type game.
Yes.
And starting to invest kind of some quite serious amounts of money into those things. So do you want to talk a little bit about how, because that wasn't something I was expecting to see, that you basically have these, it's not something you've put processes for in the game, but it's people creating their own teams external to the game and then racing them in the game. Was that something that you were surprised about?
Yes.
Or surprised how quickly it came?
I was surprised personally how quickly it came, but I think it's natural because it's one of those things where we again see blockchain, allowing a game to more accurately reflect what goes on in the physical world. So we've seen that with virtual real estate games as well, where all of a sudden you'll see activities going on that users are engaging in that actually mimic what happens in the real world with mortgages or what have you, that are not specifically put out there by the developer. And I think Teams is the same thing in the case of F1 Delta Time. So, it's logical for people to cooperate to advance in the game. And in this case, there's a reward for that too, because that cooperation can result in the appreciation of value of some of the things that they own, or it can also mean that they can pool resources to acquire assets in the game that they might not otherwise be able to acquire. So in that case, it may not be that different than thinking about guilds, for example, in some kind of an RPG or something like that.
And I guess what's interesting, when I spent a bit of time looking at the kind of the mechanics of esports,
it was interesting because it was very much like a winner takes all sort of thing. That people, it costs a lot of money to run an esports team and very labor intensive, and you have to find all these, teenagers and kind of keep them in order and make them train and stuff. But basically, you had in every game you basically had one chance a year to win the big prize pool. And those were the teams that made the money, and everyone else lost money, and a bit like kind of football, I suppose. And I guess what's interesting, at least at the moment, with the blockchain stuff, is there still is those big, potentially we go to those big prizes, and the people who win those get the most prizes. But because you're owning the kind of assets in there as well, it broadens out the business model, and instead of kind of like the potentially the people who own the game, or the big team who wins League of Legends every year taking the money, it just spreads much better with blockchain. And I always kind of felt blockchain was something esports was missing, but no one's seemed to be able to bring blockchain at scale to esports. It seems to be still quite disconnected.
Yes. Well, and we're very excited about that potential, because I think the one thing that we have not really explored yet in the NFT collectible side of things is the collectability of things that have esports provenance. And I think that's going to be the next leg of the stool that we'll see once games have a lot more, DAUs and championships under their belt, so to speak. In another year or so, we'll start to see people selling cars and swords and whatever in-game items that have resulted in victories that are well publicized or have been owned by particularly adept players or famous players. But I think at the moment we're seeing provenance in more from I'd say an investment angle, because one of the things that we have observed is that there are definitely influencers within different game communities who, other players like to follow what they're doing. Just like we see that with, people who pick stocks and invest in the stock market, or, collect any type of thing, because there are people who are viewed as having certain expertise, and other people will be interested in investing what they're investing in.
And I guess bringing it back a bit more kind of specifically, we saw, I mean, you've been selling many, well, not many, you sold a few of your kind of what you call Apex cars, which are your most expensive, your rarest NFTs. And we saw the first one of the new 2020 series, which is the new NFT series that you're doing, because obviously you're based around the F1 kind of real world schedule. And we had the Bahrain 2020 car, which sold for look at $77,000, and that was actually bought by someone who I didn't really know, but my Lithuanian friends have filled me in about it. Tony G, who's a kind of quite a well known entrepreneur and poker player and all that sort of stuff in Lithuania. And he's someone who I don't think, it doesn't sound like to me, had much of an interest in games, particularly beforehand, as in computer games, but now has quite formally set up a team. Is it called something faster team or something? He set up formally a team in F1 Delta Time to race in F1 Delta Time, and he sees that as a kind of obviously a big business opportunity, which is
yes. Well, also the other thing about Tony is he loves technology, and he's been a major blockchain advocate, particularly even in his political role, because he's actually an MEP for Lithuania. And so he's set up a lot of blockchain initiatives on behalf of the Lithuanian government. And so he's really supportive of the blockchain community there. So I think that's how he got into gaming, because for him, he's always loved entertainment products, and this was a nice mix of two hobbies, I guess you could say.
And I won't go on about it too much, but as we are kind of on the expensive NFT thing, I mean, I think that there are a few projects game projects that have kind of shown quite a lot of kind of become like investment grade sort of quality. And I was just kind of totting up how many NFTs you sold. I mean, I got to over 2 million so far, $2 million worth in terms of all your different sales and stuff. And you also currently, at least, it may change. You currently have the record for the most expensive single game NFT, maybe the most expensive NFT per se, mightn't it? Kind of the $222,000 for one element of the Monaco track on the game. So, can you talk a little bit about? Because that's a little bit different in the sense it's not just the value of that NFT isn't like an art NFT that is just a thing that sits on a blockchain. This actually has some revenue attached to it as well. So can you maybe spend a bit of time explaining?
Sure. So the idea here was that obviously the F1 season has tracks and cars and drivers and all those different parts. And we thought that one thing that would be really interesting, because blockchain allows us to create an actual economy within a game, we thought it was very interesting to see how it would be if the players could then participate in the actual economy of the game. So we have this Rev token, which we can talk more about, which is the in-game currency of the game. And a lot of things that you do in the game require Rev in order for you to participate. So if you want to race, you have to spend Rev to participate in a race. So there's an entry fee. And that means that every time a race occurs on a track, there's a certain amount of revenue from the entry fees. So in thinking about how to give ownership to players in those tracks, we divided the tracks up into the same way that we divided up cars. So there are certain bits of track that are more rare and more valuable than others. And so the one you're talking about is 5% of the Monaco GP track. And many people who really follow F1 may agree that Monaco is probably the most storied of the F1 tracks, and therefore one of probably the most desirable to own. And so we started with what was sort of the jewel in the crown of track ownership. But the thing is that it's not, as you said, just an object on the blockchain to own, but the ownership also imparts the right to the owner of revenue that occurs on the track. So we're basically giving a revenue share to the owner of that part of the track, which means that they become, in effect, our business partner. And that's something that, I think it changes the model of the game a little bit, because it becomes a lot less about just us as the developer and the player as the customer who's playing. It really brings that community into the fold, because they're not just playing, they're not just introducing their friends to the game, they actually have an ownership stake in the game that's meaningful, that they can actually earn from to reinvest in the game or to withdraw those profits from the game. And I think that it's a win-win, because it also makes them much more enthusiastic evangelists for the game. And that's something that we're all looking for these days in trying to build communities in games.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're breaking up, is it each track into 330 NFTs, or is that just the Monaco one? But basically you're breaking up tracks into quite a lot of different pieces.
Yes, we are. And part of the idea behind that is that we've gained some notoriety for certain things being NFTs being sold for quite high sums in the game, but we don't want it to just be the domain of people who have lots of money to spend. The idea is that you can provide an environment where there's something for everybody. So I think we also wanted to make sure that there's enough to go around for everybody, because we don't want it to just be, a playground for the wealthy. Yes, exactly. Well, and also, frankly, the even the section of Monaco track is still cheaper than actual Monaco.
Oh boy, yeah, absolutely cool. So presumably that's that the moment you've only sold one bit of track NFT. I guess at some point in 2021 there'll be a bigger rollout of that.
Yes,
sort of.
Definitely. And I think the idea again is we've been trying to be judicious about how we do content sales, because also we're quite conscious of the fact that we want to get people participating in the time trial events. And now you can start to see that we have some avid players who are regularly playing, and we want to, make sure that everybody knows that this is not just, an investment opportunity, because what grabs the headlines are that, people buy things and spend a lot of money on them, or sell things and make a lot of money on them. But we also want people to come and play and have fun. And so I think that part needs to have its time to play out as well, because one thing that I find very encouraging is that some people, I've had friends tell me that they have their friends who've come to participate in some of our content auctions, and they initially came because they felt like it sounded like a good investment opportunity. But then when they realized what was going on and did a little bit more homework, they found, oh, well, there's actually kind of a fun game here. So if I if I'm speculating on a car, I can use it and play a game while I own it instead. And so we convert them into becoming players rather than just investors. And I think that, that's kind of a mission accomplished from our point of view.
It seems to always be the thing that the balance with blockchain games is because it's on a blockchain, because everything is basically has a value attached to it. Then you clearly, the kind of some sort of speculative investment thing has to be part of the community. It seems to be the balance of getting that bit right. So it's kind of feeding money in with what will hopefully be the much more kind of bigger part of the community, which is just kind of enjoying stuff, and if there is some money to be accrued as part of that, then all well and good. But that's not the primary thing. And I guess at this point, it's good we should point out that I think by the time the podcast comes out, you've actually the first kind of gameplay, not the first, but the main gameplay element of F1 Delta Time will be live, and obviously that's kind of rolling out over the coming months in terms of how people kind of race against each other. But the first kind of game, what people would consider a game bit of it.
Yes, exactly. So that will be live. The time trials have already been going for the last 6 months or so. And obviously, the NFT marketplace itself is quite active with people buying and selling goods. And I think the other part that's important here then is what we call the Rev ecosystem. So we've created this in-game currency, which is the Rev token. And the idea there was to find a way to both incentivize and reward players, so they can earn Rev, they can spend Rev. But we wanted to make sure that we were showing off why this would be different than any other in-game currency. And so what we've pledged to do with Rev is that it will be the in-game currency of other motorsports related games that we will be launching in the coming months. So we've licensed MotoGP, we've licensed Formula E, and Rev will be the currency for all those other games as well. So the idea is that once you have been spending time in F1 Delta Time, you may accumulate a certain amount of Rev as a result of being in the game community, and then you can also use that Rev to go and play MotoGP, or and you get that interchange back and forth, and it increases the value and utility of Rev to the player.
So it's interesting that Rev is I mean, it's an ERC20 token, so it's a standard kind of Ethereum token. We've seen various games launch various sorts of tokens this year. Rev was interesting in the sense that you basically kind of, I think, not really soft launched it, but you just launched it through Uniswap. So you just basically created a liquidity pool, rather than doing a kind of more formal, what we might call IEO or ICO, that sort of thing. Can you talk a little bit about the thinking behind that and why you thought that was the best approach?
We did that because for us, we were also, it was not a specific fundraising exercise. I think other games, including our own sandbox game, have used IEOs also as a way to raise funds to put towards the cost of development of the game. But in this case, we were actually looking to just simply create an in-game currency that was on the blockchain that had utility for players, which is why we did it in a sort of a softer way, if you will.
I was just checking the price. how and I guess it is interesting because when I guess you go through a more formal kind of sale process, then that's kind of the companies involved are kind of setting a price. And they may, it's like launching an IPO, launching a share. There's some kind of bounds in which you're kind of choosing, but you kind of, one of the kind of key things you want is obviously for the price to kind of go up when it launches, but because you've done it as a speculative thing, that can be quite hard to judge, and we see things go up and down. But whereas doing it this way is actually, I guess, at least, I mean, you have to set a price to begin with on the liquidity pool, but basically the market comes to a decision on what it wants to do rather than you doing that. So I guess it's I always kind of think that's a more interesting kind of perspective than people's noses get out of joint either way on the potentially on the other one.
Well, you can never please everybody, as you know, and you just read the comments if you want to know about that. But I think in this case, it was. We've always come at F1 Delta Time from the perspective of being game developers. So we're game developers who have learned about blockchain and crypto as we've gone along and tried to figure out how best to use it within a game. But fundamentally, we're always focused on the game aspect of it, which I think is something that is maybe slightly different than other projects that are great blockchain games but have been built by blockchain or crypto teams who happen to have a passion for games, but that was not their main business to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean there are different. I mean we're in this early stages, and the background of the teams very much shapes some of the decisions they make. And it's not that the decisions they make are wrong. It's perhaps the decisions that they make would be wrong for other teams to make. I suppose that's the most that's the most diplomatic way of putting it. So running a token, as we've seen, not just not really from the game space, but in general, running a cryptocurrency is not the easiest thing. You have you're not in control necessarily of the pricing. Speculators can come in and up and down, and equally, it's interesting that you're going to run multiple games on the Rev token, which obviously hopefully drives demand for it. But equally, you can get misbalances, I suppose, of depending if one game's doing better than the other. You can kind of basically you've now connected these games together. You connected their economies together in a direct way. How much kind of thinking have you done around the kind of the downsides of that?
As much as we can. It's always, I mean, we're in a very new field, so there are always going to be unintended consequences. I think one of the things that we have tried to do is, I was describing this to somebody yesterday who's been in gaming for a long time, but not that familiar with blockchain. And I said, it's one of those things where, when we first went into mobile gaming, we started to think about having psychology PhDs in consultation because creating game loops involves a lot of psychology. And now in blockchain gaming, we find ourselves having to consult actual economists in order to assist us with creating in-game economies, because there's a lot of stuff you have to think about. We're not just creating an in-game currency like gold or diamonds or something that just are infinite and copyable. So we have to think about inflation. We have to think about money supply and things like that. So I totally agree with you. I think that we have to always be cognizant of what that when we're pushing down one lever at one end of the seesaw, another end may go up, for lack of a better analogy.
Yeah. But I guess on the positive side, you got 3 games connected, and it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if if kind of it was kind of a competition between those 3, and having those 3 actually forced one of them to be more popular than it otherwise would have been, sort of thing. I suppose from that point of view, there's a safety net. If you happen to be playing one game, but actually you can make much more money in the other game, that will just be, people will flow in that way, and maybe it'll be a bit of a kind of seesaw balancing act until they find out. So in a sense, maybe you've got a bit of a kind of counterbalance going on there. So maybe it's less problematic than maybe I'm.
Well, and also I think there is an argument to be made that cryptocurrencies in general, tokens in general, are converging on some sort of universal exchangeability. Because there are so many exchanges, and for people to participate in things like Uniswap or official exchanges and stuff is relatively straightforward these days. So who's to say that it won't really matter what tokens you're holding at a certain point in time, because there will always be some way to exchange one for another.
Yeah. And more generally, I we won't discuss this point particularly, but it is interesting that I'm starting to see now, or we're starting to see other kind of projects not in the blockchain space thinking about how they merge their existing kind of currency into a cryptocurrency. So one I don't know very much about is a avatar platform called IMUV, maybe pronounced IMVU or something, I don't know. But they're quite a big platform, not really something I know about, but they're going to again creating an ERC20 token. So I think it is interesting that they're kind of the universality of a blockchain cryptocurrency is something that people are clearly now just thinking as being something that is fairly straightforward, and kind of bolting onto existing communities, which I always think is the most risky thing. One thing I did want to chat about in that context, though, I've always been surprised really about the animosity of some people in the game space to blockchain. I mean, most people just don't care less about it, but some people are very experienced people are actively antagonistic about it. And obviously, not obviously, but you've been around in the game space for goodness knows how long, making mobile games, and that's kind of how we originally kind of got met, probably over a decade ago now. Have you been surprised about the kind of people in the industry and their attitude to blockchain? Is that changing? I mean, I've had some conversations with people in the last year who I think now understand it's something that potentially is happening. In their heads, they kind of intellectually understand this is something that's not, it's not like a made up thing. It's not, it's a proper thing. Proper businesses are getting involved now, but in their gut, they still can't get it. And there's this kind of, so it's becoming less antagonistic, but they still can't get it. And I wonder if there's just the game people, there'll be a generation of people who just kind of can't get it. I guess like some people didn't get free to play.
So I was going to say exactly the same thing, because when I came into gaming, I came into mobile, and we're an Asian-based company, so it was all about free to play pretty much from the first day I came into this industry a decade ago. And as I learned more about other parts of the game industry, particularly people who came from the console space, I was always amazed how there was a very rigid sort of doctrine about this idea of fun, as if fun was something that there was only one universal truth to, and that a game should be like a traditional console game where you pay for the game up front and then that's it. Once you turn it on, it's just about fun. And so there was a very hard doctrine about the fact that selling something to somebody in a game diminishes the fun, because there's a sales process going on. You're taking away, resources in the game from them, or you're forcing them to have a paywall here for something, and that takes away fun. There's still that creative tension, I think, in making games, but honestly, I think the freemium model has won out, because players seem to enjoy it just as much, if not more. And for developers, we make more money under the freemium model, so we can make more games for people. So I think it's a win-win there. And I've noticed the same thing in the blockchain game community, where I think there are still a lot of traditional game developers who don't yet see how the addition of blockchain can enhance fun. They see how it can enhance the revenue for the developer, but they don't see how the experience can be more enjoyable to the player. But I think that really means that you have to get your head around those metagames that it opens up the possibility for, as I said.
It was interesting in that context that I saw the other. Actually, I missed it as well. So there was a press release that came out from the Forte platform. I'm sure you know about, and it was the worst press release ever. Not because the content was bad, but because they basically didn't say Will Wright's making blockchain games, which was kind of hidden away in there. And I was just like amazed, like Will Wright, the guy who did the Sims and Sim City, is making a blockchain game, and I thought that was kind of interesting, because okay, he's probably now he's not the current generation of people making mash up console bashing games, but he never was really. He was more intellectual. But when you have people of that status making blockchain games, and I was just amazed that when I just happened to kind of come across the press release, it was like a month ago, it was in mid-November, and I was like, how did I not know about that? And then it transpired that no one knew about it. It was quite, and I just kind of think, maybe is that because Will Wright's not important anymore, or is it because it's blockchain and the games press don't get it? And it's kind of interesting that actually I think a lot of stuff, and people are being a bit secretive, because obviously he's announced something. When that game's coming out, what that game is, who knows, sort of thing. So it may be a bit of a long way off, but it seemed, we always kind of hear these kind of hints, below the surface. Oh, what's this guy doing? What's this guy doing? And they're quite big names in the space, but no one will come and officially announce that. And then someone did, and no one cared less. So I wonder if we're kind of sitting in this kind of information black hole that for some reason the games industry doesn't want to write about it.
Although, frankly, I mean, you've been at this a long time, and remember when mobile started to take off, how many years it took for mobile to actually be, mobile was a very serious game platform for many years before some of the major console titles created mobile versions of what they did on console. I mean, I'm talking about some of them waited 5 or 10 years, to the point where people were getting out of mobile, and they're just like, okay, now we're ready, because they were the entrenched oligopolists of console. So to them, that was gaming.
Yeah, no, it is I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with these companies. It's kind of the what they call it,
Well, it's what they know how to do, right?
the innovator's dilemma, isn't it?
Yes.
You basically build a company and it gets brilliant at doing this one specific thing, and it gets so brilliant at it that it has no bandwidth to do something that anyone thinks it should be able to do.
Yeah, well, because you're basically asking a big Hollywood studio who makes movies to say, okay, now make a half-hour sitcom for TV and do it on 1% of the budget, and it's a different thing altogether.
Okay, so coming to the end of the podcast, there was one thing I actually wanted to talk to you about, which was, I think, more of a trend for 2021. And in 2020, we've seen this kind of big explosion of activity on the Ethereum blockchain, all the DeFi stuff, and kind of the game NFT stuff has all been Ethereum. But we're starting to see now what people used to call Ethereum killers, or maybe calling Ethereum replacements, or slightly less loaded terms. Lots of new blockchains that are launching with various kind of different focuses on. And Animoca has you've done at least one press release saying some of your games, I think including F1 Delta Time, are going to come to other blockchains. So I kind of wondered what your opinion was on, I guess, 2021 as a kind of a multi-chain sort of approach, and the kind of opportunities and the challenges that come along with it.
So I think first and foremost, one of the big issues for this year that everybody in NFTs, especially not just in gaming but also in the art world, have been talking about on Ethereum have been gas prices, gas fees. So it has impacted gaming very greatly, and I think we've seen with interest examples of other games like Splinterlands, for example, where they don't have the same issue, able to generate quite a healthy economy at relatively low price points per transaction, because of the fact that they don't have the same issues with gas fees. So I think it's caused us, us meaning all game developers on blockchain games, to be looking around at what other alternatives there are. That having been said, obviously Ethereum is, the second most widely held cryptocurrency and kind of the gold standard for gaming blockchains. So I think it's more about trying to see what other opportunities are out there. We did announce, as you mentioned earlier this year, that we will be bringing our MotoGP title, as well as one based on our own IP called Stargirl, to the Flow blockchain, created by Dapper Labs. And I think that is the result of not just a long-term partnership we've had with Dapper, but also our own genuine interest in seeing what the development process is like on that Flow blockchain and how it compares to our experience on Ethereum. And obviously the jury is out until we get further into the project and understand what the differences and sort of costs and benefits are. But I do think that one of the exciting things, frankly, about being in a relatively nascent industry is that a lot of these technology standards are not set in stone yet. And so I think that a lot of developers are experimenting. They're experimenting not just with different chains, but with tools to allow cross-chain compatibility or interoperability. And I think that experimentation is going to continue for the foreseeable future.
And I guess it does play into a more long-term kind of vision of blockchains, where we have these things like kind of Polkadot and Cosmos, which are kind of by definition are kind of multi-chain kind of infrastructures that potentially cross other chains, and other chains can be part of those. And I mean, I think that kind of stuff is still broadly a long way off and probably horrible technical aspects. But I think conceptually that's kind of where a lot of people think it is going to go, isn't it? Where it doesn't really matter kind of quite what system you're operating on. It's and I guess that's the broad goal for the game side of things. No one cares what blockchain you're running on, really. I mean, at the moment they do, but they shouldn't. And just a game that players can own things in the game and build communities around is where I guess
yes.
we're all hoping to go.
And the more complex the games we start to launch on blockchain, obviously, the more taxing it'll be technologically, and so people will come up with other solutions. I mean, in non-blockchain gaming, one of our subsidiaries has come out with technology that allows cross-platform, multiplayer experiences that are truly cross-platform, meaning you can be on console, PC web, and mobile in the same battle royale game. Amazingly, that's something that people have not yet done. Considering the incredible success of Fortnite and other big battle royale titles. But those things are hard, and it takes time to develop that kind of stuff.
Good. Well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast and chatting about 2020 and a bit of 2021.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking forward to. I mean, I think if 2020 was anything to go by, at least in blockchain gaming, not in our private lives of pandemics and things like that, it was a fantastic year. And I think that NFTs are definitely here to stay. So if anybody was concerned whether there was anything here, there definitely is. I think we've had a fabulous year.
Yeah, I always kind of think with blockchain games, having been in it now, getting on for kind of 2 years, yeah, no, 2 years, 3 years, 2 years, I can't remember, 3 years now. That it's one of those things that you're never quite sure if everything's going to change and you can have this big rocket ship kind of take off, or basically nothing's going to change. There doesn't seem to be a lot in between, which is a bit which is interesting.
Definitely.
Anyway, excellent. Thanks for your time, Robby, and thanks for you listeners for listening. Currently on a series of kind of 2020 recap interviews with some of the big players of the year. So please do keep subscribing, or if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe through your podcast channel of choice, and come back next time to see what's going on in the world of blockchain games.